The year was 1887, when Thomas Ashford, a man of meticulous habits and a merchant's keen eye for detail, inherited Cedar Hollow, his family's ancestral plantation in Virginia. He was prepared for the usual burdens of such an estate: the sprawling fields, the aging house, the complex ledgers of a post-war economy. What he was not prepared for was a discovery that would unravel generations of carefully constructed silence, revealing a truth so profoundly disturbing it defied belief. Behind a wall in the oldest part of the house, a wall deliberately concealed and forgotten, he found a sealed room. And within that room, the undeniable chilling evidence of lives lived in utter isolation, children then adults, who had been systematically erased from every census, every family record, every document that affirmed their existence. The question that would echo through the halls of Cedar Hollow, and later through the annals of history, was not if these lives had been hidden, but why an entire family had conspired to keep them from the world for 40 years. Cedar Hollow was more than just a plantation. It was a monument to a bygone era, a sprawling estate of nearly 2,000 acres nestled in the rolling foothills of Virginia's Piedmont region, roughly 40 miles west of Richmond. Its main house, a grand federal-style brick structure completed in 1805, boasted a symmetrical facade, tall sash windows, and a wide columned portico that spoke of prosperity and permanence. Yet by 1887, the grandeur was faded, the prosperity a memory. The Civil War had torn through the South, leaving economic devastation and a social order in ruins. Plantations like Cedar Hollow, once powered by enslaved labor, now struggled to adapt to a world where the old ways were no longer viable. Thomas Ashford, at 43, was a man shaped by this shifting landscape. Unlike his father, William, who had been born into the planter class and clung fiercely to its traditions, Thomas had sought his fortune in Richmond's mercantile world. He was pragmatic, educated, and possessed a quiet intensity that belied his reserved demeanor. He had married Margaret, a woman of refined sensibilities from a prominent Richmond family, and together they had raised 3 children. Edward, now 21 and pursuing law, Catherine, 19, recently married to a tobacco factor, and James, a thoughtful 16-year-old with a nascent passion for literature and art, who often felt out of place in the practical world of commerce and agriculture. William Ashford, Thomas's father, had passed away in late 1886. A year marked by a particularly harsh winter and a lingering sense of despair that seemed to settle over the land. William had been a man of formidable will, known for his stern countenance and an almost obsessive need for order. He had managed Cedar Hollow through the war and Reconstruction with a tenacity that bordered on obsession, but the estate had never truly recovered its former glory. He had also been a man of profound silences, a trait Thomas had always attributed to the burdens of his position. Now Thomas understood those silences had been a shield. The household at Cedar Hollow was a microcosm of the post-war South. A small staff of 12, mostly freedmen and their descendants, maintained the house and grounds. There was Mrs. Eliza, the cook, whose culinary skills were legendary, but whose eyes held a perpetual sadness. John, the groundskeeper, a man of few words but immense loyalty, had served the Ashford family since before the war. And then there were the others, a group of 4 individuals who lived in a secluded cottage on the far edge of the property, rarely seen, never spoken of. Their existence was an open secret, a whispered understanding among the older servants that one did not inquire about the others. Thomas, having spent most of his adult life away, had only a vague awareness of them, dismissing them as distant relatives or dependents of his father's charity. Eleanor Ashford, William's widow and Thomas's mother, was a fragile presence in the house. She had retreated into a world of quiet grief and fading memories, her mind often wandering. She spent her days in her sun-drenched sitting room on the 2nd floor, surrounded by faded photographs and the ghosts of her past. Her health had been declining steadily since William's death, and her once sharp intellect was now clouded by a gentle confusion. Thomas often found her staring blankly out the window, a faint, unreadable expression on her face. He would soon learn that her silence, too, was a form of protection. The air at Cedar Hollow, even in the crisp autumn of 1887, carried a faint scent of decay beneath the sweet aroma of drying tobacco leaves. The grand house, with its peeling paint and creaking floorboards, felt less like a home and more like a repository of forgotten histories, each shadow holding a secret, each dust-laden corner whispering of leaves unlived. Thomas Ashford was a man of order. Upon inheriting Cedar Hollow, his first task was to conduct a thorough inventory of the estate, a meticulous process he approached with the same diligence he applied to his merchant ledgers. He began with the main house, systematically moving from attic to cellar, documenting every piece of furniture, every book, every forgotten heirloom. It was during this methodical exploration that his attention was drawn to the cellar. The main cellar was a cavernous space, cool and damp, with a pervasive earthy smell. It housed rows of wine bottles, barrels of preserved vegetables, and an assortment of discarded household items, broken tools, moth-eaten blankets, and trunks filled with forgotten correspondence. Thomas had explored this cellar countless times as a boy, a place of shadowy adventures and whispered tales. But even then, a particular section of the eastern wall had always intrigued him. It was a stretch of brickwork that seemed to absorb light, a solid, unyielding expanse that felt different from the rest. He remembered asking his father about it once, a fleeting question from a curious child. William Ashford's response had been sharp, almost venomous. "That wall is not to be touched, Thomas. It holds nothing of interest to you." The subject had been closed with a finality that had silenced any further inquiry. Now, with his father gone, Thomas felt a renewed, almost compulsive curiosity. He examined the wall more closely. The mortar between the bricks in this particular section was indeed different. It was slightly lighter in color, less weathered, and seemed to have been applied with a less skilled hand than the original masonry. It was a patch, a repair, a deliberate concealment. The realization sent a shiver down his spine, a premonition of something deeply unsettling. He returned the following afternoon, armed with a heavy claw hammer and a sturdy chisel. The house was quiet, the servants occupied with their daily routines, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the fields. He worked in silence, the rhythmic tap of the chisel against mortar echoing in the damp stillness of the cellar. To his surprise, the mortar gave way with relative ease, crumbling into fine dust. It was as if the wall had been designed to be temporary, a facade rather than a permanent barrier. After nearly an hour of strenuous effort, a small opening appeared. He peered into the darkness beyond, a faint musty odor wafting out. Retrieving a lantern from a nearby shelf, he lit it, the flickering flame casting dancing shadows. He widened the opening just enough to squeeze through, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and morbid fascination. He found himself in a narrow, unlit passage, barely wide enough for his shoulders. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of old wood and something else, something indefinable like forgotten lives. The passage led to a heavy wooden door, secured by a rusted iron chain and a formidable padlock. The lock was ancient, its metal corroded by time and damp. Thomas, with a surge of adrenaline, brought the hammer down on the padlock. It shattered with a resounding clang that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. The door, freed from its long imprisonment, groaned on its hinges as he pushed it open, revealing the darkness beyond. The room was not what Thomas had expected. He had anticipated a storage space, perhaps a forgotten cache of valuables, or even a hidden compartment for illicit goods. Instead, the lantern light revealed a space that was undeniably, chillingly a living quarter. Approximately 12 ft by 15 ft, it was small but meticulously organized, every item placed with a deliberate, almost desperate care. In one corner, a narrow cot was neatly made, its thin mattress covered by a faded but clean linen sheet. A small hand-stitched quilt lay folded at its foot. Beside the cot, a rudimentary wooden table held a chipped ceramic pitcher and basin, both empty but spotless. Above the table, a shelf contained a small collection of books, their leather bindings worn smooth from countless readings. Thomas picked one up. It was a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, its pages brittle and yellowed. His gaze then fell upon the walls. They were whitewashed, but in places the plaster was scratched and marked. Above the cot, a series of charcoal marks formed a crude calendar. Groups of 5 vertical lines, with the 5th line crossing the previous 4. Thomas counted them, his breath catching in his throat. 47 full groups and then 4 additional marks. 47 * 5 + 4 = 239 days. No, wait. 47 groups, each representing a week, and then 4 additional days. He recounted, his mind racing. No, it was simpler. Each mark was a day. 47 groups of 5, 235 + 4 = 239 days. But the ledger entries would later reveal a much longer period. This was just one segment of time, perhaps a child's attempt to track their existence. There were other marks too, names scratched into the plaster with a sharp object. He recognized some, others were unfamiliar. Samuel, Margaret, Thomas. The sight of his own name etched into the wall of this hidden prison sent a jolt of profound unease through him. And Catherine. These names were interspersed with crude drawings, a garden in full bloom, a river with a small boat, a distant town with tiny indistinct figures. Someone in this room had spent decades imagining a world they had never seen. The room contained evidence of multiple occupants. Along another wall, 4 thin pallets were arranged, each with a folded blanket and a small lumpy pillow. A wooden chest, its lid slightly ajar, revealed 4 sets of simple homespun clothing, neatly folded. 4 wooden spoons, 4 ceramic bowls, and 4 tin cups rested on a small built-in shelf. Everything was clean, orderly, almost sterile. This was not a place of neglect, but of deliberate, controlled confinement. A faint, almost imperceptible draft led him to a small wooden door set into the floor. He lifted it, revealing a narrow, winding staircase that descended into deeper darkness. With a growing sense of dread, he carefully made his way down. The lower chamber was smaller, perhaps 10 by 10 ft, and served as a rudimentary kitchen and pantry. A small cast-iron stove stood against one wall, its flue leading up into the main house's chimney system, cleverly concealed. Shelves were stocked with jars of preserved fruits and vegetables, sacks of flour, and barrels of water. A small, sturdy wooden table occupied the center of the room, and on it, bound in worn leather, lay a ledger. Its pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting. Thomas picked it up, his hands trembling. The first entry was dated 1847. He recognized the script immediately. It was his father's. Thomas sat heavily on a wooden stool, the lantern casting a circle of light on the aged pages of the ledger. The first entry, dated April 12, 1847, was chillingly concise. The children have arrived, 4 in total: Samuel 12, Margaret 10, Thomas 8, and Catherine 6. They are frightened but compliant. Eleanor has prepared the rooms. No one must know. Dr. Vance's instructions are clear: absolute isolation for optimal development. His father's hand, precise and unyielding, documented 40 years of deliberate concealment. The ledger was a meticulous record, not just of the children's physical needs, but of their intellectual and emotional development. Entries detailed their daily meals, their illnesses, the books provided for their education, the lessons taught by Eleanor. Birthdays were marked with small, almost poignant notations in the margins, often accompanied by a brief observation on their growth or temperament. June 3, 1848. Samuel shows a remarkable aptitude for mathematics. Margaret is drawn to literature. Young Thomas is restless, constantly questioning. Catherine remains quiet, observant. Eleanor reports they adapt well to the routine. The air quality remains a concern. November 1, 1850. Dr. Vance has not returned. His last communication was vague. We proceed as planned. The children are thriving, though their questions about the outside grow more frequent. Elinor handles them with remarkable patience. The entries continued, a chilling chronicle of lives lived in the shadows. Thomas read of their small triumphs, a new word learned, a complex problem solved, a drawing completed. He read of their minor ailments, fevers, coughs, scraped knees, treated with remedies prepared by Elinor. He read of their growing personalities, Samuel's quiet leadership, Margaret's imaginative storytelling, young Thomas's rebellious spirit, Catherine's profound introspection. August 15th, 1862. The war rages outside. Cannon fire can be heard faintly on clear nights. The children do not understand the significance, only the distant rumble. We maintain our peace within these walls. Perhaps their ignorance is a mercy. The world beyond is too cruel for them now. March 20th, 1867. 5 years since the war's end, the world has changed irrevocably. Elinor insists we cannot release them. They have known nothing but this place. The world would be cruel to them, she argues. I have come to believe she is right, though the weight of this secret grows heavier with each passing year. The moral implications are profound. July 10th, 1872. Samuel, now 37, has asked again why he cannot leave. He is a man grown with the mind of a scholar, yet confined like a bird in a cage. I told him it is for his own protection, that the world would not understand. He did not believe me. I am not certain I believe myself anymore. The experiment has become a life sentence for them and for us. December 5th, 1880. I am growing old. My heart is not what it was. The strain of this secret has taken its toll. I have made arrangements in my will for the continuation of their care, though I pray for a resolution. Elinor will ensure that no one discovers them. The secret will die with us, as it must, for their sake and for the family's honor. The final entry was dated January 18th, 1886, barely a month before William Ashford's death. The children are well. They are no longer children, but adults, their lives defined by these walls. I pray for their souls and for mine. The burden is immense. Thomas closed the ledger, his mind reeling. The meticulous detail, the cold precision, the gradual shift from scientific detachment to moral anguish. It was all undeniably his father. But the sheer audacity of the act, the 40 years of sustained deception, the imprisonment of 4 human beings, it was incomprehensible. He looked at the names scratched on the wall above, the crude drawings, the silent testament to lives stolen. A profound sense of horror, mixed with a chilling curiosity, settled deep within him. He had to know more. The discovery of the sealed room and the ledger plunged Thomas into a state of profound moral and psychological turmoil. He resealed the room, replacing the bricks and mortar with a practiced hand, his movements mechanical. For days he walked through Cedar Hollow like a ghost, the weight of his father's secret pressing down on him. He could not eat, sleep, or focus on the estate's affairs. His wife, Margaret, noticed his pallor and distracted air, attributing it to the stress of inheritance and his mother's declining health. He offered vague assurances, unable to articulate the unspeakable truth he now carried. His first instinct was to destroy the evidence, burn the ledger, brick up the room permanently, and bury the secret with his father. But the meticulous merchant in him, the man who valued records and truth, recoiled from such an act. He also felt an inexplicable pull towards the 4 individuals whose lives had been so cruelly manipulated. He had to understand. Thomas began his investigation subtly, probing the edges of the family's history. He started with his father's personal papers, hoping to find some clue, some justification, some explanation beyond the cold entries of the ledger. He sifted through decades of correspondence, financial records, and legal documents. He found nothing explicit about the hidden room, no direct references to Dr. Vance or the children. However, a pattern emerged in the financial records. Regular substantial payments made to a Mrs. E. Hartwell beginning in 1847 and continuing for decades. The payments were far too large for a mere servant's wage, and they continued even after his maternal grandmother, Eleanor Hartwell, had supposedly passed away in 1877. This discrepancy gnawed at him. He then turned to the older servants, those who had been at Cedar Hollow for decades. He approached them cautiously, asking seemingly innocuous questions about the house's history, its older sections, and any unusual occurrences. John, the groundskeeper, a man whose memory stretched back to the antebellum years, offered little. Master William kept his own counsel, sir. He mumbled, his eyes darting away. Some things best not to ask. Eliza, the cook, was more forthcoming, though her words were veiled. There were always whispers, Master Thomas, she said, stirring a pot of stew, of shadows in the old cellar, of voices when no one was supposed to be there. But Master William, he made it clear. No questions, no looking. Her voice dropped to a whisper, some secrets they ain't meant for the light of day. These conversations, while not yielding direct answers, confirmed Thomas's growing dread. The secret was not entirely unknown. It had been a carefully maintained silence enforced by his father's formidable will, and the unspoken understanding of a community accustomed to deference. His next and most difficult step was to approach his mother, Eleanor. She was now 71, her mind a fragile tapestry of fading memories. He found her in her sitting room staring out at the autumn leaves. "Mother," he began gently, "I've been going through Father's papers. I found records of payments made to your mother, Eleanor Hartwell, for many years, even after her passing. Do you recall anything about this?" Margaret's gaze, usually distant, sharpened. Her hands, gnarled with age, clutched the shawl draped over her shoulders. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, pain, crossed her face. "My mother." She whispered, her voice thin. "She was a good woman, Thomas, a kind woman. Yes, mother, but these payments, they were unusual. And they continued for so long. Was there something she was doing for Father, something beyond the usual?" Margaret's eyes once again became distant. "Your father, he had his reasons always. Some things are best left undisturbed, Thomas. For the sake of the family, for the sake of peace." Her voice gained a surprising strength. "He was a good man, your father. Whatever you may have found, whatever questions you may have, you must understand that he acted out of what he believed was right. If you love this family, you will let this matter rest." Her words, delivered with an unexpected force, were a direct warning. Thomas pressed no further, sensing a wall he could not breach. He left her room, the weight of the secret growing heavier. His mother's evasiveness, her sudden clarity, only deepened his conviction that she knew far more than she let on. He felt a chilling sense of isolation. The truth was buried not just in a sealed room, but in the very fabric of his family. The silence of a family can be more deafening than any scream, and its secrets more binding than any chain. What truths do you believe are hidden in the quiet corners of history, deliberately forgotten or buried? Margaret Ashford suffered a severe stroke a week after Thomas's inquiry, leaving her partially paralyzed and her speech slurred beyond comprehension. She lingered for 3 more weeks, her eyes wide and unfocused, before finally succumbing. Her death, while expected, left Thomas with a profound sense of regret and a renewed determination. Whatever secret she held, she had taken them to her grave. Among his mother's personal effects, stored in a dusty trunk in the attic, Thomas found a collection of leather-bound journals. They were written in a delicate, elegant hand he recognized as his maternal grandmother's, Eleanor Hartwell. The journals spanned 30 years, from 1877, and they provided the missing pieces of the horrifying puzzle. Eleanor Hartwell, Thomas learned, was not merely a kind grandmother. She had been a woman of remarkable intellect and education, a trained teacher before her marriage to Robert Ashford, Thomas's grandfather, who had died prematurely in 1843. After his death, Eleanor had returned to Cedar Hollow to live with her daughter, Margaret, and son-in-law William. She was a woman adrift, grappling with grief and a sense of purposelessness. The first entry, dated April 1st, 1847, was a revelation, a peculiar proposition from William. He has been approached by a doctor, Samuel Vance, a physician of unconventional theories. Dr. Vance believes that children raised in absolute isolation from societal corruption can achieve unparalleled intellectual and moral purity. He seeks a controlled environment away from prying eyes to conduct his experiment in human development. William, ever the pragmatist, sees potential in this and perhaps a way to alleviate my own melancholia. I am to oversee the children's care. Eleanor's early entries detailed her initial fascination mixed with apprehension. Dr. Vance, a charismatic but elusive figure, had brought 4 children to Cedar Hollow: Samuel, Margaret, Thomas, and Catherine. He presented them as orphans, children from troubled backgrounds who would otherwise face lives of hardship. Eleanor, a woman of deep compassion, saw them as vulnerable souls in need of protection. May 20th, 1847. The children are settling. They are bright, curious, and remarkably resilient. Samuel, the eldest, possesses a quiet dignity. Margaret, a vivid imagination. Young Thomas, a fiery spirit. Catherine, a profound stillness. Dr. Vance visits infrequently, providing detailed instructions on their diet, education, and psychological conditioning. He speaks of untainted minds and pure potential. I find his theories both compelling and unsettling. As the years progressed, Eleanor's tone shifted. Dr. Vance's visits became rarer, his instructions more cryptic. By 1849, he had vanished entirely, leaving the 4 children and the experiment entirely in William and Eleanor's hands. The initial scientific curiosity gave way to a chilling realization. They were now the sole custodians of 4 lives imprisoned by a misguided ideal. October 10th, 1850. Dr. Vance has not been heard from in over a year. William believes he has abandoned the project. The children are entirely dependent on us. William has sealed the outer entrance, fearing discovery. I am now their teacher, their nurse, their only window to a world they cannot touch. The weight of this responsibility is immense. Are we their saviors or their jailers? Eleanor's journals became a poignant record of her internal conflict. She poured her heart into educating the children, teaching them to read, write, and reason. She read to them from books of history, poetry, and adventure, painting vivid pictures of a world they could only imagine. She celebrated their small victories and comforted their moments of despair. Yet she was acutely aware of the moral compromise she was making. July 4th, 1860. The children are no longer children. Samuel is 25, Margaret 23, Thomas 21, Catherine 19. They are intelligent, articulate, and deeply aware of their confinement. They question us constantly. William maintains that releasing them now would be crueler than keeping them here. They have no legal identity, no social skills, no understanding of the world's complexities. He fears they would be exploited, ridiculed, or worse. I fear he is right. We have created something that cannot be undone. The Civil War entries were particularly harrowing. Eleanor described the fear, scarcity, the constant threat of discovery. Yet within their sealed world, the children remained safe, oblivious to the cataclysm raging outside. This period solidified William's conviction that their isolation was a form of protection. September 1st, 1875. I am growing frail. My hands tremble, my sight dims. The children, now adults, care for me with tenderness. They are my family, the only family I have truly known in these later years. William is also aging, his resolve hardening with time. He speaks less of the experiment and more of their protection. The lie has become their truth. And ours. The journals ended abruptly in March 1877 with a final shaky entry. My strength fails. I pray for their future. May God forgive us. Eleanor had suffered a stroke shortly after, living for 5 more years unable to write, her mind clouded. The full burden of their care had then fallen solely on William. Thomas closed the last journal, the pieces of the puzzle now agonizingly clear. His grandmother, a woman of compassion, had been drawn into a monstrous experiment, then trapped by circumstance and a misguided sense of protection. His father, a man of rigid principles, had inherited the burden, transforming it from an experiment into a lifelong imprisonment. Convinced it was the only way to shield them from a world that would not understand. The names on the wall, the marks, the books, the carefully preserved items, they were not just evidence of confinement, but of a desperate attempt to create a semblance of life, of dignity, within an impossible prison. The revelation from Eleanor's journals left Thomas with an unbearable weight. The 4 individuals, now adults in their late 50s and early 60s were still alive, still confined. He had seen the ledger, read the journals, and now he knew their names, their ages, their personalities as described by his grandmother. He knew the depth of their isolation. The moral imperative to act was overwhelming, yet the practicalities were daunting. He confided in his youngest son, James, a thoughtful and empathetic 16-year-old who possessed a moral compass unburdened by the family's historical compromises. James, who had followed his father to the cellar and witnessed the initial discovery, listened with a quiet intensity. When Thomas finished recounting the full horrifying tale, James' response was immediate and unequivocal. "We must release them, Father. It is the only right thing to do." "But James," Thomas argued, "they have no legal identity, no understanding of the world. They have no skills, no means to support themselves. They are, in every practical sense, infants in adult bodies. To release them without preparation would be to condemn them to a different kind of prison." "Then we must prepare," James insisted, his young face set with determination. "We must teach them. We must give them a chance at life, however late it comes. To do otherwise is to continue the crime." Over the next 3 months, Thomas and James embarked on a clandestine mission. They began visiting the hidden chamber daily, bringing books, newspapers, and carefully selected objects from the outside world. The initial encounters were fraught with tension. Samuel, now 63, was a man of quiet dignity, his eyes holding a deep, almost ancient sadness. He was wary, his questions precise and probing. Margaret, 61, was the most intellectually curious, devouring every piece of information with an insatiable hunger. Young Thomas, 59, was consumed by a simmering rage, his questions sharp, his resentment palpable. Catherine, 57, remained largely silent, her gaze distant, as if her mind still resided in the world of her imagination. They explained, as gently as possible, the truth of their confinement, the misguided intentions, the changing world. Samuel wept a silent, profound grief for a life stolen. "I do not know how to live in the world," he confessed, his voice raspy from disuse. "I do not know how to walk in sunlight. I do not know how to speak to people. You are condemning me to a life of suffering." Margaret, however, was pragmatic. "I will learn," she declared, her eyes bright with a fierce determination. "I have learned everything else in this room. I can learn this as well." Thomas the younger was furious. "Why were we kept here?" he demanded, his voice trembling with years of suppressed anger. "What crime did we commit that we should be punished in this way?" "You committed no crime," Thomas Ashford replied, his voice heavy with remorse. "You were victims of an experiment and of circumstances beyond your control. I am deeply sorry for what has been done to you." "Sorry," Thomas repeated bitterly. "Sorry does not give me back the years that have been stolen from me. Sorry does not teach me how to live." Catherine remained a mystery. She spoke little, her eyes often fixed on some unseen point beyond the walls. The prospect of leaving seemed to overwhelm her, rendering her almost catatonic. She clung to the familiar confines of the room as if they were the only reality she knew. Thomas arranged for their gradual release. He purchased a small, secluded cottage on the outskirts of Richmond, far enough from Cedar Hollow to avoid immediate scrutiny, but close enough for him to oversee their transition. He hired Mrs. Helena Voss, a compassionate and discreet widow known for her quiet strength, to live with them and guide them through the bewildering complexities of the outside world. The adjustment was agonizing. Samuel struggled profoundly. The sheer sensory overload of the world, the cacophony of city sounds, the vastness of the open sky, the constant movement of people, was overwhelming. He would often retreat to the darkest corner of the cottage, covering his ears, trembling. He showed an unexpected aptitude for carpentry, finding solace in the precise, quiet work of shaping wood. Margaret, fueled by her intellectual hunger, adapted with remarkable speed. She devoured newspapers, books, and conversations, her mind a sponge. She learned to write with a flourish, filling journals with her observations of a world she had only imagined. She eventually found work as a skilled seamstress, her nimble fingers creating intricate designs. Thomas the Younger channeled his rage into a fierce determination. He took on physically demanding labor, working in the burgeoning textile mills of Richmond. His strength and unwavering work ethic earned him respect, though he remained a solitary figure haunted by his past. He never married, but found a quiet companionship with a fellow mill worker, a man who understood unspoken burdens. Catherine remained the most fragile. The world outside the sealed room seemed too vast, too loud, too incomprehensible. She rarely spoke, her movements slow and deliberate. Mrs. Voss, with infinite patience, taught her simple domestic tasks. Catherine found a quiet solace in repetitive chores, her mind seemingly lost in a world of her own. She eventually found work as a domestic servant, a role that required minimal interaction and allowed her to remain largely unseen. Her transition from absolute isolation to the bustling world of the late 19th century was a profound shock. Consider the immense psychological toll this would take on individuals who had known no other reality. Their struggles highlight the ethical dilemmas of such an experiment. The legal hurdles were immense. Without birth certificates or any official records, the four were non-existent in the eyes of the law. Thomas, with the help of a sympathetic lawyer, painstakingly created false documentation. Birth certificates were forged, dated to 1847 and 1848. They chose their own surnames. Samuel became Samuel Hartwell, honoring Eleanor. Margaret chose Margaret Vance, a defiant reclaiming of the name of her original captor. Thomas, in a complex act of both defiance, Catherine, with her quiet nature, simply chose Catherine Wells, a name she found in a newspaper. Their new identities were fragile, built on a foundation of lies, but they were their only path to a semblance of freedom. Thomas Ashford never fully recovered from the profound moral shock of his discovery. The knowledge of his father's actions and his own complicity in perpetuating the secret cast a long shadow over his life. He became increasingly reclusive, finding solace only in the quiet solitude of Cedar Hollow, managing the estate with a grim, almost penitent dedication. He never remarried after Margaret's death, nor did he seek further companionship. His life became a quiet atonement. Samuel Hartwell lived for only 5 years after his release, dying at the age of 68. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but Thomas suspected it was a failure of the spirit, a soul too long confined to truly embrace freedom. He was buried in a small, unmarked grave in a Richmond cemetery, his existence still largely a secret. Margaret Vance, however, thrived. Her intellectual curiosity, honed by decades of reading, found its outlet in the world. She eventually married a kind widower, a retired school teacher named Charles Henderson, who cherished her quiet wisdom and fierce independence. She bore 2 healthy children, both of whom she raised with an unwavering emphasis on education and freedom of thought. Margaret never spoke publicly of her confinement, but she meticulously maintained her own journals, a testament to her extraordinary life. She died peacefully in 1921 at the age of 74, leaving behind a legacy of quiet strength and intellectual resilience. Thomas Ashford, the Younger, struggled for many years with his anger and the profound sense of injustice. He found a measure of peace in hard labor and the camaraderie of his fellow millworkers. He never married, but he built a respectable life, earning a reputation for honesty and unwavering integrity. He died in 1928 at the age of 81, a man who had carved out his own existence despite the immense burden of his past. Catherine Wells remained the most enigmatic and fragile. The world proved too overwhelming for her gentle spirit. She continued her work as a domestic servant, moving from household to household, a quiet, almost invisible presence. She never married, never formed deep attachments, her mind seemingly forever lost in the imagined landscapes of her childhood drawings. She died in 1912, at the age of 65, in a Richmond poorhouse. The cause was listed as pneumonia, but those who knew her whispered that she had simply faded away, unable to find her place in a world that had denied her for so long. In 1901, Thomas Ashford the Elder, driven by a profound sense of historical responsibility, commissioned Dr. Edmund Garrett, a respected historian from the University of Virginia, to undertake a comprehensive history of the Ashford family. Thomas provided Dr. Garrett with unprecedented access to all family papers, including the chilling ledger and Eleanor Hartwell's poignant journals. His only stipulation was that the history not be published until after his own death. Thomas Ashford passed away in 1903 at the age of 79, his heart finally giving out after decades of carrying his family's dark secret. Dr. Garrett's meticulously researched book, The Hidden Years, a chronicle of the Ashford family, was published in 1905. It sent shockwaves through Virginia society and beyond. The story of the sealed room, the experiment, and the 4 hidden lives became a national sensation. Newspapers across the country debated the ethics of scientific inquiry, the responsibilities of families, and the very definition of human freedom. The authorities, spurred by public outcry, launched an investigation. However, by 1905, most of the key figures were long dead. Dr. Samuel Vance had vanished decades earlier. William and Eleanor Ashford were gone. The older servants who might have provided testimony had either passed away or were too frail to offer coherent accounts. The investigation ultimately yielded no criminal charges, concluding that while the actions were morally reprehensible, the legal framework of the time offered little recourse, especially given the lack of official identities for the victims. The case was closed, but the questions lingered. The story of Cedar Hollow, while shocking, was not an isolated anomaly in the broader historical context of the 19th century. The era was marked by a fervent belief in scientific progress and a burgeoning interest in human development, often without the ethical safeguards we recognize today. The concept of informed consent was virtually non-existent, and vulnerable populations, children, the poor, the mentally ill, and tragically enslaved people, were frequently subjected to experiment by individuals who believed they were advancing knowledge. Dr. Samuel Vance, whether a real physician or a charlatan, represented a darker current within this scientific zeal. His theories of optimal human development through isolation echoed the ideas of some contemporary thinkers who believed that environment could entirely shape character, divorcing individuals from the corrupting influences of society. Such ideas, while often cloaked in scientific language, frequently led to profound abuses of power. The post-Civil War South, with its fractured social structures and economic instability, provided a fertile ground for such hidden acts. The traditional authority of plantation owners, though diminished, still held sway in isolated rural communities. The pervasive culture of silence, particularly concerning family matters and the treatment of dependents, allowed secrets to fester and grow. The lack of robust public services, social welfare, or governmental oversight meant that individuals could disappear from public record with relative ease, especially if powerful families wished them to. The census records of the time, while comprehensive for recorded citizens, were not infallible. Children born outside of formal institutions or deliberately concealed could easily slip through the cracks, becoming unrecorded lives. This historical reality lends a chilling credibility to the Cedar Hollow narrative, making the listener question how many other such stories might remain buried. It was not until the horrors of the 20th century, particularly the medical experiments conducted during World War II, that the international community began to establish stringent ethical guidelines for human experimentation, such as the Nuremberg Code 1947 and the Declaration of Helsinki 1964. These codes, however, came decades too late for Samuel, Margaret, Thomas, and Catherine. One of the most enduring and unsettling aspects of the Cedar Hollow story is the complete disappearance of Dr. Samuel Vance. Despite extensive efforts by Dr. Garrett and subsequent historians, no definitive records of his existence have ever been found. There are no medical school registrations, no professional society memberships, no publications in scientific journals, no birth or death certificates that conclusively identify him. This absence of evidence has fueled numerous theories. Some speculate that Dr. Samuel Vance was an assumed name, a pseudonym used by an individual who wished to operate outside the bounds of conventional society or law. He might have been a disgraced physician, a self-proclaimed expert, or even a con artist who exploited the intellectual curiosity of men like William Ashford. Another theory suggests that Vance was indeed a legitimate, albeit radical, physician whose ideas were so far outside the mainstream that he was ostracized by the medical establishment. He might have chosen to conduct his experiments in secret, fearing professional ruin or legal repercussions. His sudden disappearance could have been a deliberate act to avoid detection. Or perhaps he met an untimely end, leaving his experiment unfinished. The most chilling possibility is that Dr. Vance was not an isolated figure. Perhaps he was part of a larger clandestine network of individuals conducting similar experiments across the country, each operating under different guises, their work hidden from public view. The lack of any trace of him leaves a gaping hole in the narrative, a persistent question mark that underscores the sinister nature of the entire affair. His ghost, if one could call it that, continues to haunt the story, a symbol of unchecked ambition and the dark side of human curiosity. Cedar Hollow still stands, a silent sentinel to its complex past. The Ashford family eventually sold the estate in the 1920s, unable to shake the lingering shadow of the sealed room. It passed through several hands before being acquired by a historical preservation society in the late 20th, preserved as Thomas Ashford found it, remains a stark, chilling exhibit. The faded whitewash, the crude charcoal marks, the worn books, the empty pallets, all bear silent witness to the lives lived within its confines. The Ledger and Eleanor Hartwell's journals are now housed in the Virginia Historical Society, carefully conserved and made available to researchers. They have become invaluable primary sources for historians, ethicists, psychologists, and sociologists, offering a unique, if disturbing, window into 19th century social mores, scientific ethics, and the profound psychological impact of extreme isolation. The story of Cedar Hollow has transcended its local origins, becoming a cautionary tale taught in universities and debated in academic circles. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked authority, the fragility of human rights, and the ethical responsibilities inherent in any form of human experimentation. It underscores the importance of vigilance against those who would seek to define, control, or erase the lives of others for their own purposes, however noble they might claim those purposes to be. For the descendants of Margaret Vance and Thomas Ashford the Younger, the legacy is deeply personal. They carry the knowledge of their ancestors' extraordinary ordeal, a history that shapes their understanding of freedom, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. They have often been advocates for historical truth and ethical treatment, ensuring that the lessons of Cedar Hollow are never forgotten. The story of Cedar Hollow leaves us with a profound and unsettling question. How many other sealed rooms exist, not just in the physical sense, but in the hidden corners of history? How many other lives have been deliberately unrecorded, their stories silenced, their existence erased by the powerful or the misguided? The truth is, we may never know. The tale of Cedar Hollow only came to light because one man, Thomas Ashford, chose to confront his family's dark legacy rather than bury it. It forces us to consider the uncomfortable possibility that our understanding of the past, and indeed of human nature, is often incomplete, shaped by the narratives that are allowed to survive, and haunted by the ones that are deliberately suppressed. This chilling account reminds us that history is not always a neat collection of facts, but a complex tapestry woven with threads of truth, deception, and the enduring echoes of human suffering. It compels us to look closer, to question deeper, and to remember that the most terrifying horrors are often those born not of the supernatural, but of the human heart. What do you believe happened to Dr. Samuel Vance? Do you think the four individuals ever truly found peace in the outside world? Or were they forever prisoners of their past? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story has captivated you and left you questioning the hidden corners of history, please consider subscribing to our channel for more immersive tales of historical mysteries and psychological suspense. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and share this video with anyone who appreciates a story that blurs the line between fact and fiction. Your engagement helps us bring these forgotten narratives to light. Thank you for listening.